The arena was vast, its towering walls made of dark metal, humming with the energy of containment fields. Thousands of Sorvath warriors gathered, their sharp, armored bodies reflecting the dim light of the torches hanging from the pillars. They roared in excitement, their deep voices echoing through the chamber. Today was a special day. Today, they would witness the power of their greatest weapon, the Dreadmaw. In the center of the arena, a large iron gate began to rise, its heavy chains rattling. Behind it, the creature's massive silhouette moved, shaking the ground with every step. The Dreadmaw, a monstrous beast created for war, emerged from the darkness. Its thick, armored skin was covered in jagged spikes, and its glowing red eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for its next victim. The Sorvath warriors pounded their fists against their chests in excitement. A smaller door opened on the other side of the arena. A metal cage was pushed forward, its rusted bars creaking. Inside the cage sat a young human child, no older than 7. His small hands clutched the bars, his frightened eyes darting across the arena, searching for a way to escape. The Sorvath laughed, their fangs gleaming under the flickering lights. "This one will not last long," one warrior growled. "They never do," another agreed. The child had been captured from a distant human colony ship that the Sorvath raided weeks ago. The warriors believed that humans were weak, soft creatures, unworthy of existence. To them, feeding a human to the Dreadmaw was nothing more than a form of entertainment, a demonstration of their superiority. A loud clang echoed as the cage door was unlocked. A Sorvath guard shoved the child forward, forcing him into the open arena. The boy stumbled and fell to his knees. Dust covered his pale face, and his clothes were torn from rough handling. But even as fear gripped him, he did not cry. He did not beg. He simply stared at the beast that towered over him. The Dreadmaw let out a low growl, stepping forward. The ground trembled under its weight. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, detecting the scent of the tiny human before it. The Sorvath warriors waited eagerly. They had seen this moment many times before. The beast would pounce, tearing its prey apart in seconds. But then, something strange happened. The Dreadmaw froze, its glowing red eyes locked onto the child, but instead of lunging, it hesitated. It tilted its massive head, its razor-sharp teeth barely visible behind its thick lips. The air became tense. The Sorvath warriors stopped cheering, their excitement shifting into confusion. The child, still trembling, slowly stood up, his small hands clenched into fists, his legs barely steady beneath him. His heart pounded, but his instincts told him something was wrong. Not with him, but with the beast. The Dreadmaw took another step closer, its breath hot and heavy. The boy squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the attack. But instead of striking, the creature let out a strange, deep rumble, a sound that almost resembled recognition. The arena fell silent. One of the Sorvath warlords stood from his throne above the battlefield, his eyes narrowing. "Why does it not attack?" he growled. The scientists monitoring the beast's behavior scrambled to check their control panels. We do not know, War Chief," one of them stammered. "The Dreadmaw's brain activity is unusual. It is reacting differently than expected." The beast bent its head lower, bringing its snout just inches from the child. Its enormous eyes, filled with an ancient intelligence, studied him carefully. The boy's breath hitched. His small fingers twitched at his sides. He could feel something, an invisible connection, something beyond words. Then, in a moment that defied all logic, the Dreadmaw lowered itself onto one knee. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mighty war beast, the ultimate predator, the weapon of destruction, was bowing before a human child. The silence shattered as the Sorvath erupted in chaos. Warriors shouted in disbelief, others roared in anger. Some believed it was a trick. Others thought the beast was malfunctioning. The war chief slammed his fist against his throne. "This is impossible," he bellowed. "The Dreadmaw bows to no one. But the beast did not move. Its massive head remained lowered, its body tense, waiting for something, waiting for the child's command. The boy took a slow step forward, his small hand trembling as he reached out. The Sorvath warriors watched in horror as his fingers brushed against the beast's snout. A surge of energy seemed to pass between them, like a bond forming in an instant. The Dreadmaw let out a deep, resonating growl, not of hunger, but of allegiance. For the first time in Sorvath history, the feared war beast had chosen a master, and it was human. The war chief's claws tightened into fists. His cold eyes glowed with fury. "This is not over," he growled. The child, still standing before the massive beast, did not look away. He did not understand why the Dreadmaw had spared him. But one thing was clear. Something inside the creature recognized him. And in that moment, the balance of power in the galaxy had begun to shift. The silence in the arena stretched longer than it ever had before. Thousands of Sorvath warriors stood frozen, their reptilian faces twisted in disbelief. The mighty Dreadmaw, a beast designed for war, had just bowed before a fragile human child. This was not how the ritual was supposed to go. The war chief sat on his throne high above the arena, his sharp claws gripping the armrests in frustration. His yellow eyes burned with rage. The Dreadmaw had never refused a sacrifice before. It had never shown mercy. And yet, here it was, lowering its head in front of the boy, its massive body still, as if awaiting an order. "This is wrong," one of the warriors muttered. "The beast is broken," another growled. The child, still standing in the center of the arena, barely understood what was happening. His small chest rose and fell rapidly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had expected pain. He had expected death. But instead, the Dreadmaw had accepted him. Slowly, with careful steps, the boy raised a trembling hand and touched the beast's snout. The Dreadmaw let out a low, rumbling sound, not a growl of aggression, but something softer, something almost protective. The war chief could not allow this to continue. "Enough," he roared, standing from his throne. His voice echoed through the chamber. "Kill the beast. If it refuses to obey, then it is no longer of use to us." Several Sorvath warriors rushed forward, their energy spears humming with power. They aimed at the Dreadmaw's exposed neck, preparing to strike. But then the beast moved. Faster than anyone expected, the Dreadmaw snapped its head up, releasing a thunderous roar that shook the entire arena. The warriors staggered back, fear flashing in their eyes. The beast's muscles tensed, its massive claws scraping against the ground. It turned its glowing red eyes towards the warriors who dared to attack it, and it did not like what it saw. The Sorvath were no longer in control. With terrifying speed, the Dreadmaw lunged. One of the warriors barely had time to react before the beast swiped at him with its powerful tail. The impact sent the warrior flying across the arena, crashing into the metal walls with a sickening thud. The other warriors hesitated, realizing that the creature they had once commanded was no longer under their control. The child watched in shock. The Dreadmaw was protecting him. The war chief's face darkened with fury. "Activate the control implants." He barked at the scientists standing near the arena's edge. Now, the Sorvath scientists scrambled to their consoles, their clawed fingers tapping rapidly on glowing panels. A loud beep filled the air as they sent a neural override signal to the beast's implants. Sparks crackled along the Dreadmaw's spine, its mechanical restraints activating in an attempt to force it back into submission. The beast roared in pain, its body trembling under the strain. The boy felt a sharp pang in his chest. He didn't understand the strange connection he felt with the creature, but seeing it in pain made his heart ache. He took a step closer, placing his small hands against the Dreadmaw's rough skin. And then something unthinkable happened. The beast's implants failed. A surge of energy erupted from the Dreadmaw's body, short-circuiting the control devices implanted within it. Sparks flew from its back as the neural links shattered. The Khorvath scientists stared at their screens in horror. Impossible. One of them gasped. The override. It's not working. The war chief's anger turned to fear. The Dreadmaw, once bound to the Khorvath's command, was now completely free. The massive beast turned its gaze toward the war chief, its red eyes glowing brighter. The Khorvath warriors who had once cheered now backed away, their confidence shattered. They were afraid, and for the first time, they had reason to be. The boy looked up at the Dreadmaw, his fear slowly fading. He didn't know why, but he felt safe beside the creature. It was as if something deep within the beast recognized him, accepted him. The Dreadmaw lowered its head again, this time with more certainty. It was no accident. It was no hesitation. This was a choice. The beast had chosen the boy as its new master. The war chief clenched his fists. His empire could not afford to lose control of the Dreadmaw. "Seize the child," he commanded. "If the beast has bonded to him, then we will use him to control it." Several Khorvath guards rushed forward. The boy gasped, his small feet stumbling backward. The Dreadmaw reacted instantly. With a single earth-shaking stomp, the beast slammed its massive claw against the ground, sending a shockwave through the arena. The Khorvath guards were thrown off their feet, landing hard against the floor. The message was clear. No one would lay a hand on the child. For the first time in Khorvath history, the war beast had turned against its masters. The war chief's eyes blazed with fury, but beneath his rage, there was something else. Fear. "The beast is lost to us," one of his generals muttered. "What do we do?" The war chief's mind raced. If they could not control the Dreadmaw, then they had only one option: destroy it. "Prepare the pulse cannons," he ordered, his voice cold. "We end this. Now." But as the massive weapons powered up, the child looked at the Dreadmaw, and for the first time, he understood. They were not alone. They were connected. And the Khorvath had made a terrible mistake. The air in the arena felt heavy, thick with tension. The Khorvath warriors, once confident in their power, now hesitated. Their greatest war beast, the Dreadmaw, stood defiant, its massive form shielding the small human child. The glowing red eyes of the beast flickered, as if something deep inside it was awakening. High above, the war chief clenched his fists. His warriors looked to him for orders, waiting for his command. He could see the fear in their eyes. This was not how things were supposed to happen. "Fire the pulse cannons," he barked. The giant weapons, mounted on the walls of the arena, hummed to life. Their barrels glowed with deadly energy, ready to unleash destruction. The Khorvath had designed these cannons to take down massive creatures like the Dreadmaw if they ever went out of control. But something deep inside the war chief whispered a warning. Something felt wrong. The child pressed his small hands against the Dreadmaw's rough skin. He didn't know why, but he could feel the beast's emotions, its rage, its pain, its confusion. It had been a prisoner for so long, forced to obey. But now, it was free. The pulse cannons locked onto the target. The energy in their barrels reached full charge. "Fire!" the war chief shouted. A deafening blast shook the arena as the cannons released their destructive energy. The deadly beams raced toward the Dreadmaw. And then, everything changed. The beast moved faster than it ever had before. With a thunderous roar, the Dreadmaw twisted its massive body, bringing up its armored tail. The thick plating along its spine flared, absorbing the energy blast like a shield. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the arena. The ground cracked beneath its feet, and the walls trembled. The Khorvath warriors staggered back, their confidence shattered. "That should have destroyed it," a general gasped. But the war chief saw the truth. The Dreadmaw wasn't just resisting, it was adapting. The ancient instincts within the beast were awakening. The red glow in its eyes flickered, then shifted, becoming something deeper, something more intelligent. The creature understood what was happening. It knew that the Xorvath were trying to kill it, and it knew that the child beside it was in danger. The war chief's heart pounded. "What is happening?" he demanded. One of the Xorvath scientists, still monitoring the creature from the control room, looked at his data screen. His sharp claws trembled as he read the readings. "War chief," he whispered, "the beast, it's not just a weapon. It's not just an experiment. It carries traces of something far older than we thought. Speak clearly." The war chief snapped. The scientist swallowed. "The Dreadmaw's DNA. It contains traces of ancient human genetic markers." The war chief's blood ran cold. Impossible. The Xorvath had believed humans were a weak, primitive species, barely capable of surviving in the galaxy. But if human DNA was inside the Dreadmaw, that meant that long ago, humanity had been more powerful than they realized. And now, that ancient power was waking up. The child didn't understand the science behind it, but he felt the change. The Dreadmaw was no longer just a wild beast. It was something more. It had chosen him, bonded with him. The great war beast turned its gaze toward the war chief. For the first time, the Xorvath ruler felt fear. "All forces, attack." He roared, desperate to regain control. The warriors hesitated for only a moment before charging forward, their weapons raised. But the Dreadmaw was ready. With a roar that shook the heavens, the beast unleashed its full strength. Its tail lashed out, smashing through the nearest warriors and sending them flying. It stomped forward, crushing the stone beneath its feet. Claws sliced through the air, knocking away energy weapons as if they were toys. The child stood at the center of the chaos, untouched. The beast protected him as if he were the most important thing in the galaxy. A warrior leaped toward the boy, energy blade raised. The Dreadmaw moved faster than the eye could follow, its claw closing around the attacker and hurling him across the arena like a ragdoll. Panic spread through the Xorvath forces. Their greatest weapon was no longer theirs. The war chief's mind raced. He had to end this now before the situation spiraled further out of control. "Prepare the fail-safe," he shouted to the scientists. The scientist hesitated. "But war chief, if we activate the fail-safe, the beast will." "I don't care," the war chief roared. "Do it." A hidden panel in the arena floor opened, revealing a massive energy field generator. The fail-safe was their last resort, a device designed to create a gravity well so strong that nothing could escape. It would trap the Dreadmaw, crush it under its own weight. The device powered up, its energy levels rising. The ground beneath the Dreadmaw began to tremble. The child staggered. The air around him felt heavier. He looked up at the beast, fear flashing in his eyes. The Dreadmaw let out a low growl, sensing the danger. The war chief smirked. This was the end. But then, the unexpected happened again. The child, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, reached out and touched the Dreadmaw's chest. A soft pulse of light flashed where his hand met the beast's skin. A deep, ancient hum filled the air. The energy field around them shattered. The war chief's smirk disappeared. What is this?" The scientist stared at his readings, terrified. The Dreadmaw's neural patterns, they're fully synchronized with the human. The beast turned to the child, bowing once more. And in that moment, the boy realized the truth. The Dreadmaw wasn't just a weapon. It wasn't just an experiment. It was something older, something stronger, and it had just chosen him. The war chief took a step back, for the first time in his life feeling true fear. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was something far more dangerous than the Xorvath had ever imagined. And they had just made their worst mistake. The arena was no longer a battleground. It was a storm. Dust and debris swirled through the air, kicked up by the raw power that now surrounded the Dreadmaw and the human child. The energy field meant to trap them had collapsed, shattered by a force no Xorvath could understand. The mighty war beast stood tall, its glowing red eyes now gleaming with something new. Awareness. The war chief stumbled back, his sharp claws gripping the railing of his throne. Fear gripped his heart. This was impossible. The fail-safe should have crushed the creature, should have ended this nightmare. But instead, the beast had grown stronger. And worse, it had bonded with the human child. The boy, still standing in the shadow of the massive creature, could feel something stirring within him. It was like a whisper in the back of his mind, a presence that had always been there but had only now awakened. He didn't know what it meant, but one thing was clear. He and the Dreadmaw were now connected. The Xorvath warriors hesitated, their weapons raised but their hands trembling. Should they attack? Their instincts told them no. This was no longer a simple beast. But the war chief was not ready to accept defeat. His empire had ruled for centuries. He would not let one human child and a rogue war beast challenge his authority. His voice rang out across the arena. Kill them both. The command broke the hesitation of the warriors. They rushed forward, energy weapons humming with deadly power. The Dreadmaw moved first. With a mighty roar, it charged, the ground shaking beneath its massive frame. The warriors who had once stood proudly against entire armies now found themselves scattering like insects before a storm. The beast's claws tore through weapons like paper, and its tail sent warriors flying. But something even stranger was happening. The boy wasn't afraid. He should have been terrified. He was small, fragile compared to the battle-hardened Xorvath. But as the warriors lunged toward him, he moved, and his body reacted faster than his mind could process. A warrior swung an energy blade at him, but the boy ducked at the last moment, as if he had sensed the attack before it came. Another Xorvath raised a plasma rifle, but the boy jumped back, avoiding the blast just in time. The war chief's eyes widened in shock. How? That's impossible, he snarled. One of the Xorvath scientists, still monitoring the situation from the control room, was shaking as he read the data on his screen. His voice was barely above a whisper. War Chief. The child. His neural patterns. They are synchronizing with the Dreadmaw's combat instincts. The War Chief's blood ran cold. The beast wasn't just protecting the human child anymore. It was sharing its power. The battle raged on, but the tide had turned. The Xorvath warriors, trained for war, were losing, not to an army, but to a single beast and a fragile human boy. And then, the child did something no one expected. He raised his hand, and the Dreadmaw stopped moving. For a moment, everything in the arena went still. The warriors froze, unsure of what was happening. Even the war chief, so full of rage, felt a chill crawl up his spine. The boy took a slow breath. He didn't know how he was doing it, but he could feel the beast's thoughts, its strength, its pain, its memories. He could sense its fury toward the Xorvath, but also something deeper. A hunger, not for violence, but for freedom. The child turned his gaze to the war chief, his young eyes holding a power that should not have belonged to someone so small. He spoke, and though his voice was soft, it echoed through the silence. Let us go. The war chief's claws dug into the metal railing. His pride screamed at him to resist, to fight, to prove that the Xorvath were the strongest in the galaxy. But for the first time, he hesitated. The Dreadmaw was watching him. The beast's glowing eyes burned into him, filled with a promise. Not a threat, not yet, but a promise that if he made the wrong move, if he gave the wrong command, there would be no more mercy. The warriors waited for the order. The scientists held their breath. The air in the arena was thick with tension. And finally, the war chief made his choice. Stand down. A murmur of disbelief swept through the Xorvath warriors, but none dared to disobey. They lowered their weapons, stepping back. The battle was over. The child exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. He turned to the Dreadmaw, placing a hand against its skin once more. The beast let out a deep, rumbling sound, not a roar of war, but something softer, something content. Together, They turned toward the exit. The Xorveth, once rulers of the battlefield, could only watch in silence as a human child, and the galaxy's most powerful war beast walked away, side by side. The war chief clenched his jaw, watching them disappear into the shadows. His empire had been humiliated, his people defeated. But deep in his heart, he knew one thing for certain. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The corridors of the Xorvath war complex were dark and endless. The child walked carefully, his small steps echoing off the cold metal floors. Beside him, the Dreadmaw moved like a shadow, its massive form barely making a sound. The battle in the arena had ended, but the war was far from over. The Xorvath war chief had let them leave, but only because he had no choice. Now the boy knew they were being hunted. The Xorvath Empire would never allow them to escape alive. The child's fingers brushed against the rough skin of the Dreadmaw. He didn't know how, but he could still feel its thoughts. The beast was restless, alert. It knew what was coming. They had to move fast. Back in the war chamber, the war chief sat on his throne, his claws tapping impatiently against the armrests. The large screen in front of him flickered with holographic displays, showing the movements of his soldiers across the war complex. "Have they been captured yet?" he asked, his voice sharp. A Xorvath officer bowed deeply. "Not yet, War Chief. The creature is unpredictable. It moves too fast for our forces to corner it." The War Chief's lips curled in frustration. He knew the Dreadmaw was powerful, but it was the human child that truly disturbed him. A fragile, insignificant being, yet somehow he had changed everything. The War Chief's eyes narrowed. "Seal all exits. Lock down the entire complex. They will not escape." The officer hesitated. "War Chief, if we do that, our own warriors will be trapped inside as well." "I do not care," the War Chief growled. "Find them. Now." The officer bowed again and hurried away. The War Chief leaned back in his chair, his claws gripping the throne tightly. His empire had ruled for centuries with fear and power. He would not let a child and a beast destroy that. Deep within the complex, the alarms blared loudly. Red warning lights flashed along the walls. Metal doors slammed shut, sealing off hallways. The child's heart pounded. They were trying to trap them. The Dreadmaw let out a low growl, its massive muscles tensing. It was ready to fight, but the boy knew they couldn't battle their way out. There were too many enemies. They needed a way out. His eyes darted around the dimly lit corridor. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Thick cables snaked along the walls. This place was built like a fortress, but every fortress had a weakness. And then he saw it. A ventilation shaft, large enough for him to crawl through. It was their only chance. He turned to the Dreadmaw, pressing his hand against its rough skin. "We need to go through there," he whispered. The beast huffed, its hot breath washing over him. It was too big to fit through the shaft. The boy hesitated. He didn't want to leave the Dreadmaw behind. But the beast's thoughts were clear. It wanted him to go. The child swallowed hard. "I'll find a way to open the doors for you," he promised. The Dreadmaw gave a slow, deliberate nod. Taking a deep breath, the boy climbed into the shaft and started crawling. The metal was cold against his hands and knees, but he forced himself to move faster. Behind him, he heard the distant sounds of footsteps approaching. The Xorvath were close. The chase. Xorvath warriors stormed the corridors, their weapons ready. Their sharp eyes scanned every shadow, every doorway. They knew the beast was near. One warrior signaled to his squad. "The human child is gone," he growled. "But the creature is still here. Be ready." They stepped forward, moving carefully. Then, a deep growl echoed through the corridor. The Xorvath warriors froze. A shadow moved in the darkness. Then another, and another. Confusion flickered through their ranks. Was the Dreadmaw multiplying? And then it hit them. This wasn't just the Dreadmaw. The other war beasts in the complex had awoken. The dread maw let out a low, rumbling sound. It was no longer alone. The child's influence had touched something far greater than just one creature. And now, the Xorvath were the hunted. The control room. The child finally reached the end of the shaft, dropping down into a dimly lit control room. Screens filled the walls, showing every part of the war complex. He scanned them quickly. He needed to find the door controls. There. His small fingers flew over the glowing interface. The alien language was strange, but somehow he understood it. His connection to the Dreadmaw had changed him. With a final tap, the security doors unlocked. The beasts were free. The fall of the Xorvath stronghold. The war chief watched in horror as the screens filled with chaos. The war beasts, once enslaved, were now rampaging through the complex. Xorvath warriors were overwhelmed, their weapons useless against the sheer fury of the creatures they had once controlled. And at the center of it all, the human child stood beside the Dreadmaw, his eyes glowing with determination. The war chief gritted his teeth. "Impossible," he whispered. This was not just a child anymore. This was the beginning of something far greater. And for the first time in his life, the war chief knew true fear. The war complex was no longer under Xorvath control. The once mighty stronghold, built to house the deadliest war beasts in the galaxy, was now filled with the roars of freed creatures and the shouts of panicked warriors. The Dreadmaw stood tall among them, its glowing red eyes surveying the chaos, and beside it, the human child, his small frame almost insignificant compared to the towering beast. But he was far from insignificant. He had freed them. The Xorvath's desperation. The war chief clenched his claws against the armrests of his throne, his sharp teeth grinding in frustration. On the holographic screens before him, his empire's warriors were losing. "How is this happening?" he growled. A trembling officer stood before him, sweat dripping from his scaled forehead. "The beasts, they are not fighting like before," he said, his voice shaking. "They are coordinated. It's like they are working together." The war chief's eyes narrowed. Beasts did not think. They did not strategize. They were supposed to be mindless weapons. And yet, here they were, outsmarting his best warriors. His gaze darkened. "The human child," he muttered. "That boy was the key to everything." "Send in the elite guard," he ordered. "I want that child captured or dead." The officer bowed and rushed out, but deep inside, even he knew, they were already too late. The child's plan. The child stood near a massive control panel, his fingers brushing against the glowing symbols. Ever since his bond with the Dreadmaw, something had changed inside him. He could understand the alien language, could sense the thoughts of the beasts. And now he had a plan. He turned to the Dreadmaw, placing a small hand against its rough skin. "We can't just escape," he whispered. "We have to make sure they never do this again." The Dreadmaw let out a low, rumbling sound. Agreement. Through the control screens, the child saw the power core of the complex. If they could disable it, the entire facility would shut down. The cages, the security systems, everything the Xorvath used to control the beasts would be gone forever. But they had to move fast. The Xorvath elite guard was already on their way. The final battle. The hallways shook as the Xorvath elite stormed the war complex. Unlike the regular warriors, these soldiers were the best of the best, heavily armed and trained for battle against war beasts. But what they didn't expect was that this time, the war beasts were fighting back. As soon as they entered, a massive razor spine leaped from the shadows, slashing through their armor. The thunder beast smashed into them, sending Xorvath warriors flying. The beasts weren't just attacking randomly anymore. They were defending their own. The Dreadmaw led the charge, its powerful tail crushing anything in its path. And through it all, the child moved like a shadow, dodging plasma fire, using his newfound instincts to stay one step ahead of the enemy. He could feel the Dreadmaw's power flowing through him, guiding him. Together, they were unstoppable. The power core. The child and the Dreadmaw finally reached the power core. It was a massive, glowing structure, humming with energy. If they could destroy it, the entire complex would shut down. But they weren't alone. The war chief himself stood in their path. His dark armor gleamed under the red emergency lights, and his sharp claws twitched with rage. "You have ruined everything," he growled. "You are nothing but a weak, pathetic creature. Do you really think you can destroy my empire?" The child did not answer. The Dreadmaw stepped forward, a deep growl rumbling in its throat. The war chief bared his fangs. "Fine," he spat. "I will end this myself." With a roar, he lunged at the child. But this time, the child was ready. He moved before the war chief could reach him, dodging with unnatural speed. The Dreadmaw struck, its massive claws swiping at the war chief, forcing him back. For the first time in his life, the war chief realized he was outmatched. This was not just a beast. This was not just a boy. This was something new, and it terrified him. The fall of the Xorvath stronghold. The child reached the control panel and pressed his hand against it. With a single command, the power core overloaded. A deep rumbling shook the entire facility. Lights flickered, alarms blared. The control collars on the beasts deactivated. The war chief stumbled back, his eyes wide with horror. The Xorvath Empire had spent centuries perfecting their control over the beasts. And in one moment, it was gone. The Dreadmaw let out a mighty roar, a call of freedom that echoed through the complex. The other beasts responded, their voices rising as one. The child turned to the war chief, his eyes calm but unyielding. "Your time is over," he said softly. And with that, he and the Dreadmaw disappeared into the chaos, leaving the war chief to watch as his empire crumbled around him. The Xorvath war complex was collapsing. Fires raged in the corridors, alarms blared, and the once mighty warriors of the Xorvath Empire ran in fear. The power core had been destroyed, shutting down the control systems that had kept the war beasts enslaved for years. Now, the beasts were free, and they were angry. The Dreadmaw moved like a shadow through the chaos, its powerful limbs crushing the metal beneath it. Beside it, the child ran with determination in his eyes. He could hear the roars of the freed creatures echoing through the burning hallways. But they weren't safe yet. They had to escape before the entire facility collapsed. The war chief's last stand. The war chief stumbled through the debris, his once golden armor now covered in ash and scratches. His empire was falling apart before his very eyes. Everything he had built, his army, his control over the war beasts, his power, was gone. And it was because of that human child. His claws clenched into fists. No, he would not let it end like this. He activated his communicator, his voice shaking with rage. "All remaining warriors, focus on the child. He must not escape." But the only response was silence. His warriors were either dead, trapped, or had already fled. The war chief's breathing grew heavy. His empire was truly lost. But if he was going to fall, he would not fall alone. With a growl, he pulled out his energy blade and charged forward. The final confrontation. The child and the Dreadmaw had almost reached the main exit. The massive blast doors were open, revealing the starry sky of an alien world beyond. They were so close to freedom. But then a figure emerged from the smoke. The war chief. His armor was battered, his face twisted with fury, but his eyes burned with hatred. "You think you've won," he snarled. "You are just a child, a weak, insignificant creature. You don't deserve to stand against the Xorvath Empire." The child did not respond. The Dreadmaw let out a low warning growl, stepping in front of the boy. But the war chief only laughed. "Do you really think I fear you?" he sneered. "You are just another beast. You exist to be controlled." With a roar, he lunged forward, his energy blade slashing through the air. The Dreadmaw moved fast, blocking the attack with its thick, armored tail. Sparks flew as the blade clashed against its scales. The child felt the Dreadmaw's emotions: anger, pain, determination. This had to end, and the child knew how. He stepped forward, his small hands reaching out, not in fear, but in understanding. His connection with the beasts had grown stronger. He could feel everything. Not just the Dreadmaw, but the other war beasts around him. The war chief raised his blade for another strike. But before he could move, every beast in the war complex turned their gaze toward him. The ground trembled as the mighty creatures closed in, their glowing eyes locking onto the one who had enslaved them. For the first time, the war chief felt true fear. He swung his blade wildly, but it was useless. The war beasts no longer feared him. With a final roar, the Dreadmaw struck. The war chief vanished beneath the fury of the beasts, his final scream drowned out by the sound of their victory. It was over. The Scifi Empire had fallen. A new beginning. The war complex was now just a burning ruin. The beasts stood at its entrance, staring at the sky above. They were free. The child stood among them, the Dreadmaw at his side. He knew this was only the beginning. The Scifi had fallen here, but their empire still existed out there, and they would come looking for him. But he wasn't afraid. He turned to the Dreadmaw and placed a hand on its massive shoulder. "We have to go," he said softly. "There are more like you, more who need help." The Dreadmaw let out a soft rumble. Agreement. The other beasts watched as the child and the Dreadmaw walked toward the horizon, leaving the ruins of the war complex behind. They had no home to return to, but together they would find one. And no matter what came next, they would face it together. The galaxy had feared the Scifi for centuries. Now it would remember the child who defied them. And the legend of the Beastmaster had just begun.